Hey guys, what's good? It's One World HD, and joined with us is Rogersbase.
What's going on, everybody? Why am I here today?
All right, so we're going to be discussing, we're going to have like a little debate slash discussion about the future potential of Luffy in the New World, basically what he has learned over the time skip, what he will learn, what he could learn, his future potential and his current potential. And we'll each have like 2 minutes to go over what we think, and if we can kind of interrupt each other, but we're going to try to keep it a little bit more organized, still somewhat non-formal though. And the goal is to stay on topic with Luffy's current and future abilities slash potential, you know, just not to like stray off on a completely different topic. And yeah, you can either agree or disagree, or I can disagree with what you're saying. The goal is just to like come up with new ideas basically, and to go over what we know. And yeah, so I will here. I have a little timer here, and what it'll do is it'll go off when the 2 minutes is over.
So you're straight up timing this. You're like, all right, here's my argument for Luffy, and it's gonna be like ding 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 ding, and then it goes to the next person.
yeah. Well, no. Like let's just say like I'm still going over something. I can kind of finish up, or you can finish up, or if I'm in the middle of it. You can say like, hey, I disagree with that. You can kind of go in the middle, but I want to kind of keep it a little bit organized, like sections, you know, just so people don't get confused.
Cool.
All right. So yeah, it'll go off here. Let me start it. All right. So basically, my idea as far as the whole thing goes is that I did a video on this before, a little discussion. A lot of people replied to it with the Jorosei replied to it. Yeah, the Jorosei replied. A lot of other YouTubers disagreed or agreed. And it was basically about Doflamingo versus Luffy, and is Gear 4th enough to take on Doflamingo 1v1 and all that. But I have a different question this time around, and it is Gear 4th the end of what Luffy learned during the time skip? So this is kind of important for a few reasons. And if Bound Man is the complete max for Luffy right now, then yes, there's a huge chance that Doflamingo is currently stronger. But I have several pieces of evidence, of course, that I will go over. And let us first start off with the time frame of the time skip. And based on several quotes and pieces of the manga, which I hope the anime elaborates off of, I'm pretty sure of the general timeline. I made a video on this before, I think with a timeline actually. That was my Gear 4th video. And the thing is that first Oda gave us a flashback during the fight with Dofi that gives us a lot of information that Luffy tells Rayleigh that Gear 4th and Kangun didn't work on the new animal he found on Rusukaina, the island he trained on. And Rayleigh said that he should learn something new that doesn't take a toll on his body. And there are several very important things we can draw from this, which I'm going to kind of bring up later in the discussion. But the important thing is that Rayleigh's still there. And Rayleigh left during the 6 months before the end of the time skip. And it was 2 years, so that was like, you know, obviously the year and a half. And Rayleigh was not only still there when Luffy had Gear 4th, but he was also still teaching him more stuff. So it's pretty much definite that at this point that there is more that Balance Man has that Luffy learned over the time skip. A lot more than just Balance Man. And Rayleigh said he still had stuff to teach him that wouldn't take a toll on his body. And all right,
there you go.
All right. So
I was like, when's that timer gonna go off? What's it gonna sound like?
I mean, you can always interrupt if you feel like something's wrong. Just be like, "Oh, I interject."
No, I mean, you were going in the right direction because this is ultimately what I believe too. You put out a Gear 4 video a while ago talking about like the different versions of Gear 4. Like we've already seen Bounce Man or Bound Man or whatever you want to call it, but I really liked your idea that the other forms of Gear 4 are based off of the other animals that he was fighting. So like Pounce Man, I think, was one of them. What was the other one that you called? It was Pounce Man,
Crush Man, like the alligator one, and there was like a
Crush Man. That's right. And I love that. I think that's a really good theory because I think all three of them probably have their own ups and downs, their own strengths and weaknesses, but I think they're all kind of on the same level of power. And to tie back into something you were saying earlier, is Luffy currently at the same level or stronger or weaker than Doflamingo if you take out of account all the stuff that happened to Dressrosa, their previous fights, everything? Just if you put them in an arena at full power, would Doflamingo be stronger than Luffy? And And I ultimately think I disagree with you. I think Doflamingo would be stronger than Luffy because, manga spoiler alert, for those of you guys who only watch the anime, maybe skip past this part. I doubt it. I doubt there's any anime-only viewers if you're listening to this theory video. But if there are, Luffy obviously has that 10 minutes where he needed to heal after using Bounce Man to his full potential. He used up his Haki, he used up Bounce Man, and Doflamingo, had it not been for Gats and the other people in the Coliseum holding him off, and Rebecca and Viola and all the other distractions, Doflamingo would have actually killed Luffy there. Luffy would have run out of Haki and Doflamingo would have killed him. However, that does not mean that I think Luffy will one day absolutely become stronger than Doflamingo, where it won't even be a question, because I think we're both in agreement that Gear 5 is bound to happen at some point. I don't necessarily agree with you that Gear 5 or whatever this other gear was developed while he was there on the island during the time skip. I think this is something that is going to naturally evolve throughout the course of this post-time skip storyline. And I also think that we'll probably end up seeing a reverse gear at some point, in which Luffy will be able to transfer between all the other gears without really any problem and any drawbacks. But I'm really actually interested to hear what you think about that. And then finally, I think with the awakening powers, I think we're bound to see Luffy's awakening power at some point before the Throne War. And I also think that maybe the awakening power will be Gear 5. There you go. Perfect timing.
All right. Okay, yeah, so you did bring up that I don't think that Gear 5th is actually going to happen, okay, it is going to happen, but I don't think it happened over the time skip. The thing is that Rayleigh said that he was going to teach something to Luffy that wouldn't take a toll on his body. All right, and this was at some point, I think it was between, somewhere at the halfway point, actually, because if you think about it, Rayleigh left at the 1.5 year point of the time skip. So, and he was still teaching him stuff. So this can mean that Gear 4th happened around the halfway point of the time skip. So this means that he had a whole other year to learn other stuff. Now, this doesn't mean Gear 5th, but I do think he may have come up with a concept for Gear 5th, but couldn't follow through with it due to not being able to fully awaken, maybe, because Rayleigh doesn't know as much about Devil Fruit powers as he does. And he knows more about Haki.
So just to clarify, though, while you're saying that, what you're saying is basically he developed Bounce Man in his first year, and then these other forms, Crush Man or Pounce Man or whatever, or Gear 5th or whatever it may be, is what he developed in his second year. So you don't think Bounce Man was the pinnacle of what he learned?
Yes.
Interesting.
And there's evidence for that. There's a lot of evidence for that because the time frame is what gives us the most evidence here because, first off, oh crap! I didn't even start the timer.
That's fine. You don't need it.
All right. Well, actually, yeah. It seems pretty organized right now, so we'll go back and forth. Yeah, I just wanted to keep it at first, just to kind of give an indication. But going back into the fight itself, it's also important to note that there was an animal on Rusukana that Gear 4th had 0 effect on, 0, and it was apparently stronger than Doflamingo because Doflamingo, Gear 4th gave him a run for his money, whereas it had 0 effect on this animal, according to Luffy. And Luffy only said that this was a new animal, implying that there had been a new section to the island with stronger animals than the first few that he ran into. Now, to give you a general idea of how strong the weakest animals were, the elephant Luffy initially fought when he first came to the island was completely unaffected by Gear 2nd. And this was, and Minotaurus, the awakened zone in Impel Down, was completely obliterated by Gear 2nd. And Luffy became the king of Rusukana, meaning he dominated animals like that and the animals that could basically resist Gear 4th, whereas Doflamingo was not able to resist Gear 4th, even with his awakening. So, of course, let that sink in for a second.
Right.
So then you might say, like, why didn't he use whatever he had against Doflamingo? And the main indicator of that is the time limit of Gear 4th, because that gives us a good indication of his stamina, because Doflamingo at the beginning of the fight said that he was around, and depending on the translation, one translation said that Luffy was at like half of his full potential because he was injured and he had used a lot of Haki throughout the whole Dressrosa. And
right, because he had the fight with Don Chinzhou, and he had the fight with Bellamy, and he had all these other fights. Right.
Yeah, and the day before he was fighting with Caesar. He was running away from the gas. He basically got he got choked out by the lack of air and all that. So his Haki and his stamina was pretty drained, and Doflamingo pointed this out. He said he was at half of his full health and whatever. But the interesting thing is that this could mean that his Gear 4th, since it relies on Haki, it was only at 50% of its time limit / potential. And this is further driven home because The second time he uses Gear 4th, which was after the 10-minute recovery of Haki, Doflamingo pointed out that his Haki was not enough to let it last for more than like a minute. And this was then, of course, proven when Luffy flew up, used King Kong Gun, and then after like 20 seconds ran right out of Gear 4. So there is a time limit.
While we're talking about King Kong Gun, though, because it's interesting, because when you talked about like how he was at half potential, and we were having this discussion on the live stream the other day, I was thinking in terms of Kong Gun. Because ultimately, right, if that was Luffy's ultimate attack and he said, oh, I know, once I fully recharge, I could take him out with one punch from this, it begs the question, why didn't he do it before? And I like what you're bringing up with the Haki, which is that he knows that if he would have done that, like, long before, he would have drained out all his energy. Like, he was basically prolonging using Gear 4 because he basically thought he could take out Doflamingo using just Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd. And then when he realized that he couldn't actually beat him and he needed to use Gear 4, that's when he ended up using Bounce Man. And I think that's interesting because I didn't see it that way when we did the live stream the other day. I was thinking what you were arguing was that, like, oh yeah, he just like, he wasn't at his max potential, and that's like, and it was like the stuff we were talking about with Doflamingo using his awakening ability and all this other stuff, yada yada yada, how like Luffy was running out of time and Doflamingo would have taken him down. I do like what you're bringing up here, which is that he basically held off on using Gear 4 because he knew that he was going to drain his power, as opposed to holding off for just like the stupid reasons of the story because he doesn't want to beat Doflamingo too quick. Do you know what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah. There's actually something really cool. Like, I thought of a good comparison. Basically, when he fought Bluno, do you remember how he first used Gear 2nd?
Right.
And then he fought Bluno, and then basically at the end he was like, oh, Gear 2nd didn't work. Now I'm going to use a whole new technique. And that was Gear 3rd. So Luffy has shown throughout the series that he's not instantly going to jump to his strongest power, probably because it takes the most energy out of him. And think about it if you were fighting, because let's just pretend that, like, I don't know, you had magical powers, anime powers, and you could do all this crazy stuff. But it drained, let's just say it significantly drained your stamina and it took a toll on your body. Would you instantly jump into a fight and use your strongest power that would take out, all your stamina and stuff? Or would you try to build up to it?
Right, yeah.
And then that actually... It's a good point because Luffy started off in the fight just going Gear 2nd and 3rd, basically trying to feel out Doflamingo's strength, overall strength. And then once he realized it wasn't enough, and once he realized he was like crushed for time, he instantly jumped to Gear 4th, despite knowing that his stamina was low and knowing that he might not be able to take Doflamingo out. But it was his best chance because he actually called Gear 4th a strategy, not a power up. He called it a strategy. So this was actually a strategy that he developed to take out strong animals in a short period of time. So maybe he felt that this would work against him in the time limit, and that if he actually had less time more time with the birdcage, because the birdcage wasn't there, they would have had all day to fight. So maybe he has techniques that actually are weaker than Gear 4th, but are stronger than Gear 2nd and 3rd. That's why I kind of proposed that he might have some kind of overdrive technique that he uses on lower gears, like Gear 2nd overdrive, where it becomes closer to Gear 4th, but it takes a toll on his body like Gear 2nd originally did. And he would have used lesser techniques that were also stronger than the standard gears to weaken Doflamingo, and then he would have used Gear 4th to then finish him off. But he didn't have that kind of time, so he needed to rush it.
Yeah, that part I don't necessarily agree with, the whole overdrive Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd thing, because ultimately, that's the only thing I think of everything you brought up so far. I'm like, probably not, because the whole reason we saw Gear 4 was because, Gear 2 had the speed, but it didn't have the strength to take on Doflamingo, and Gear 3 was just too slow, even though it was powerful. So he needed, the mix between Gear 4 to actually take down Doflamingo. That's, Doflamingo clearly spelled that out in their fight. He was like, Gear 2nd, these punches feel like nothing, and Gear 3, it's too slow. I could see through what you're going to do. So I don't necessarily think that there was an overdrive form of Gear 2nd to Gear 3rd. I think he was fighting at his full potential of both of those gears when he was fighting Doflamingo. I think he, at that point, was trying his hardest, using those gears, and then finally said, all right, it's time to pull out my ultimate technique to finally take him down. And I think, if anything, maybe the other Gear 4 forms drain more energy than Bounce Man does. Maybe Bounce Man is the weakest of the 3 Gear 4s, but he knew that, once I go into Gear 4, I'll be able to take this man out.
Yeah, but here's the problem, all right? And even if it doesn't happen right now, let's just say there's theoretically no Gear 2nd and 3rd overdrive right now. if he goes up against a dude like Kaido, if Gear Second and Third had 0 effect on Doflamingo, does that mean they are now extinct techniques? Because if he goes up against dudes even stronger than Doflamingo, that means Gear Second and Third will have 0, and I mean 0 use on any other future opponents, and that kind of is a disappointment. A lot of people, because that's going to be like, okay, now I can't use any gears, other than Gear Fourth. And then it to me, like, then it becomes sort of like, you never seen Bleach, but like maybe Naruto is a good example, where they always jump to their like best technique right away in a fight. And I would rather that not happen. I'd rather him, build up, like Gear Second, improve Gear Second, and then improve Gear Third, and then Gear Fourth. That way they're closer together, because there was a huge difference between Gear Fourth and the lesser 2 gears. It was basically like no use at all, and then overwhelming power,
So this is kind of what I was going with the reverse gear thing, is because what I'm thinking with reverse gear is that if he does end up going into reverse gear, what I'm thinking is he could jump to Gear 4, do a couple attacks, and then in order to conserve his energy, could go reverse gear back to like Gear 2, and then not have to deal with any of the major drawbacks of Gear 4, like drawing too much Haki. So what I'm saying is, like, if he's going up against someone like Kaido or like Jack, I think Kaido is even like too far off at this point. Let's say someone like Jack, someone like, I don't know, Jack's a good example. If Luffy was going to go after him and he wanted to really wear him down, but he didn't want to use all of his energy up, what he could do is jump to Gear 4, do a ton of damage to Jack, sort of like knock him off balance a little bit, reverse gear, conserve the rest of his energy, and then go in with Gear 2 and Gear 3 attacks. Because, like, if you watch, like, any real-life fight, right? You're watching, like, a title fight. If a guy goes in with, like, a really strong punch to try to knock the guy out, and then he immediately goes within a bunch of, like, smaller rapid-fire punches, that's kind of what Luffy's doing with Gear 4 and Gear 2nd if he was going to reverse gear, right? He goes in with a really strong punch at first, goes in with, like, a Kong gun, then could reverse gear, not wanting to use up the rest of his energy because he knows he doesn't have to, and then goes in with a bunch of, like quick bullet punches from Gear 2, and that'll be that. And I think that's how we're going to see Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd used in the future. I don't necessarily think we're going to see, like, stronger forms of them. I think he's just going to use those to conserve his energy so he doesn't, like, waste all his time, sort of like what happened here with Dressrosa and Gear 4. Because I think that's the main reason why he didn't use Gear 4, is he knew it was going to knock him out and it would leave him vulnerable. And so he basically just needs to try to develop a technique, if he hasn't already, to conserve that energy and still be able to do powerful attacks. Even if they're not on the level of Gear 4, I think if he's already used a Gear 4 attack, he needs to at least be able to go back to his other forms and not immediately just revert into being useless for 10 minutes.
That's actually pretty funny, because I have like a very, very similar idea, but it's not reverse, actually. Instead, you know how in cars, the fastest gear is overdrive, right?
Right.
My alternative to Gear 2nd and 3rd overdrive, and I just use that term because it sounds cool, Gear 2nd overdrive. It could be something else. It could just be like, Gear 2nd accelerate. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah, like a powered up version, basically.
Yeah, so my alternative actually was, instead of there being a Gear 5th, it could be instead called Gear Overdrive. Or just Gear 5th overdrive. And basically, it would allow him to, in Gear 5th, and this is a little sneak preview, because I haven't actually done a video on this yet, but I plan to. But this is like a little sneak preview to this idea. And that is that Luffy will actually be able to enhance every single part of his body in Gear 5th. And I'll discuss how he does that in my theory. And basically he will allow... actually, I'm going to say it right here. I'm going to be a little bit risky here.
Yeah, go ahead.
And basically his awakening will allow him to expand each cell inside of his body. And each cell will basically be able to store more energy, basically, and that will allow him to essentially be able to grow, and he'll become slightly bigger, and then he will also be able to use the powers of all the previous gears through enhancing his cells, basically.
I actually really like that idea that awakening for him would be stretching out his cells. That's actually kind of cool.
Yeah,
like it actually makes him grow. I like that a lot.
And
but
go ahead.
When you're thinking about it, if you're thinking in terms of like how blood actually works, if blood gets too thick or gets too clotted and it stretches out, it's going to make you slower. It's going to make you weaker. So what I'm actually thinking is that maybe awakening would shrink his cells, so then it's like full speed. It's just like it rushes through his body and he's able to do pretty much whatever he wants. I don't know, but I like that idea of like expanding, maybe not even necessarily his cells, but maybe expanding his veins or something like that to really like make him go crazy. But I think, this is my main question for you. Yeah. Going off of all of this, is that do you think he's already developed his awakening? Because I don't think he has. I think that's something that's going to happen throughout the course of the next couple arcs. Because he looked genuinely shocked when Doflamingo described awakening to him back in Dressrosa. I think that's something that now Luffy has been made aware of, and now he's going to try and build up to awakening. I don't necessarily think that he's already, achieved awakening. And once more, going back to something you said earlier, which was that Rayleigh was telling him, a technique to take down the people who were unaffected by Bounce Man's, original form, or Bounce Man's first punches or whatever they're called, Leo Bazooka or the Culverin Cannon, the first named attacks that we saw of Gear 4. That final opponent that was on the island, Rayleigh said those attacks weren't effective against him. When I was reading Dressrosa, I thought what Rayleigh was talking about was the King Kong gun that eventually took down Doflamingo. And I know, you've clarified already here that you think it's something else. You think it's a different form of Gear 4, or maybe Gear 5th, or maybe an overdrive gear or whatever. But I think I kind of disagree with that. I think the other forms, maybe. The other forms of Gear 4, maybe, could be what Rayleigh was talking about. But I think ultimately, Gear 5 or Reverse Gear might be it in terms of the rest of the power that he's developed back during that time skip. And I think ultimately the thing that we'll see Luffy really power jump from will be when he finally unlocks his awakening. And I think that'll probably happen maybe in one of the fights with the Yonko, or maybe in the arc leading up to one of the fights with the Yonko. And I think we're still relatively far away from that, despite what's going on right now with Sanji and, the hints to Kaido and Wano and Sanji and Big Mom. I think we're still relatively far away from Luffy actually going up against the Yonko. And I still don't even think he's going to do that by himself. I think he's going to team up with other characters to take them down. But that's my opinion.
Okay, so what you said, so Rayleigh, the problem with Rayleigh is that a lot of people do think that is King Kong gun he was implying when he said that you need to learn something better than Gear 4th, more efficient. Right. And the problem with that is that Gear 4th actually King Kong gun puts more of a stress on his body, because he was completely knocked out after using it. So King Kong gun can't be what Rayleigh was implying. Instead, I think when Luffy said he needed something better against those animals, that new animal he found, that was maybe the indicator for King Kong gun. But actually what Rayleigh said was that he needs something that doesn't put a toll on his body. And the only two things that we know of so far that would apply to that is either improved Haki or Devil Fruit Awakening. And the thing is, with Haki, is that Luffy said at the end of the time skip that Rayleigh, for the first year and a half, taught him the basics, or he helped him master the basics of Haki. So that means whatever was learned afterward may have been advanced Haki, or it could have been new abilities of his Devil Fruit. Now, actually, I did sort of a video on this, and I covered this in my Gear 4th Forms video, but there is an indicator for how awakenings work, and that is Chopper, because we can all agree that his monster point is awakening, because it looks exactly identical to the Impel Down Zone guards. But before that, one or two Rumble Balls allows him to gain new abilities for his Devil Fruit. Sort of like how Brook gained the ice ability for his Devil Fruit, and how Robin can now use gigantic limbs and all that. So I think that So I think there is partial awakenings that exist, and basically and then also another indicator is that Doflamingo said that there is a whole new world of possibilities once you awaken, meaning that even he may have not reached his full potential just yet, because
right.
There is more.
That's a good point. I wanted to bring that up. That's actually a really good point. Yeah. Is that I think both of them could still learn new techniques going forward. I think this is probably the last major fight that we're going to have with Doflamingo until the Throne Wars. I don't think we're going to see him for a long time. But I think when we do see him again, he'll have completely mastered the rest of his awakening techniques, and maybe we'll have a new technique as well.
Yeah, and I think a good comparison to make with your point about him being genuinely shocked about awakenings is that maybe Luffy subconsciously learned new Devil Fruit powers, and this is indicated by Gear 4th actually, because in the anime it stated he had learned a new way to improve his Devil Fruit, and it even showed on his torso with the tattoos, it showed a Devil Fruit on his body, meaning that he had in some way learned to improve his Devil Fruit through Bound Man, and Bound Man of course translates to Balanced Man, and I think that the Cavalry, or the Python Cannon, is actually him utilizing a new power of his Devil Fruit, which is to bounce off of air, because a lot of people say that this is like Skywalk, maybe, just him incorporating Skywalk into his arm. But actually, when he fires it off, the sound effect it uses is that of a gun firing off. like a pow sort of sound.
Yeah.
Like a collision. So that means, and it even gives off a little bit of like dust, like a little impact thingy when he bounces off the air. His arm bounces off. So he's actually colliding with the air somehow. It's interacting with the air, his arm. So some people thought that maybe his arm's turning by using armament Haki to harden certain areas, but actually it is an actual impact with the air, which could mean that he has utilized the bounciness property of rubber in his awakening and is now able to sort of subconsciously apply this to air or his environment, and that's why he bounces off everything he touches. Of course, that's all theoretical because it was never confirmed, but
right.
I do think that this could be a sign that he full awakening might be where like people like Doflamingo are very close to. But Luffy may have, over the time skip, learned to slowly improve his Devil Fruit powers, sort of like how Chopper equals... One Rumble Ball could equal where Luffy is like right now, and then Monster Point Chopper could be like where Luffy could be with Gear 5th maybe. And that's like a good indicator to show how Awakening could work. Because if Awakening's just one thing, like you just do a single... If it's a single event, it's going to be kind of lame because it's like one day you wake up and you're just magically awakened, you know? It wouldn't be like you trained for that. So I propose that Luffy is partially awakened right now with Gear 4th or maybe whatever else he has, or he has achieved a new level of Haki which he just hasn't shown off yet, because honestly I think Doflamingo was insanely strong, but Luffy wasn't able to go all out against Doflamingo, obviously because of the handicap of being completely worn out, and Doflamingo pointed that out. So maybe if he goes against maybe like a future opponent, he will show off whatever he learned during the second year of the time skip. And that could be... I don't think he learned Gear 5th once again, but I do think he may have come up with a concept using advanced Haki, because I think Gear 5th will be a combination of advanced Haki and a full awakening combined.
So do you no longer believe in your monkey god idea?
Oh, no. I think that he will actually achieve that when fighting against Kaido, maybe.
So what would that be then? Would that be another form of Gear 4, or would that monkey god thing be Gear 5, or would that be his awakening? Because... Okay, so that'd be his Gear 5, would be the monkey god thing.
Yeah, cellular expansion, elasticity, him being able to control cells.
Okay, cool. Okay, I could see that. See, the thing is, this is nice to have me on, because I'm not really going to argue, because with Luffy, I have, like, no idea. And it's not even something I've really speculated on. The only time I ever really even talk about Luffy's potential is usually only when I'm talking with you. Normally, everyone else is like, let's talk about Zoro, let's talk about Sanji, let's talk about all these other characters. And what's interesting is I feel like there's so much more, like, grounded, like, evidence for all those other characters that with Gear 5 and with Luffy and all the potential other powers that he might have as Awakening, I feel like it's just, like, free reign for everybody to theorize what they want. But you bring up some really good points, and you've brought up enough evidence where I could, like, believe what you're saying. I'm still not completely sold, and I still don't necessarily think that we'll get, like, an Overdrive and Gear 5th and Reverse Gear and Awakening and all this stuff. But I do still think you're on the right track. I think we could both agree, though, that he's not going past Gear 5th. I think
big time.
Like, the limit in terms of, like, numbered gears. And we might not even get Gear 5th. We might just get, like, Reverse Gear or Overdrive Gear or something, and then his Awakening, and that'll be that. But I like what you were saying with the Monkey God stuff, and I like what you were saying in this video. And yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you're saying. I don't really have anything else like to add. I really like the cell idea. I like the expansion of his body. Everything. I think it's great.
Okay, I just want to go over two more topics before we end this because
go ahead.
Okay, so the one thing I did notice, which is really strange, is that with Zoro and Sanji, they both showed off this sort of Haki aura, and which was Diable Jambe, the Hell Memories, and the Devil Form, and then you have Ajura with Zoro, which Kaku called his spirit. Oda also said in SBS that that Diable Jambe was actually Sanji heating up his spirit, sort of his soul. He said that someone asked why Sanji didn't burn when he used Diable Jambe, why didn't his pants burn? And Oda said it was because his spirit was burning hotter, implying that the fire he uses is not actually physical, and it is actual sort of like spiritual energy, sort of like what Haki does with spirit armor, being able to detect spirits, and conquering spirits, which is the three colors of Haki. But the odd thing is that during the time when Zoro and Sanji were developing these like strange spiritual techniques, Luffy was using his Devil Fruit powers. He was only using Gear Second, which was all physical. He hadn't like advanced except for maybe Conqueror's Haki, where he could control animals and stuff like that. So that's where I think the monkey god thing comes in, because the whole idea of him having an individual Haki aura, like basically an identity to his Haki, like what he represents, that Zoro and Sanji basically developed. And that was the whole idea with that. And that's really strange how Luffy didn't develop Haki like Sanji and Zoro did. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get what you mean.
So I actually think that maybe his devil fruit is keeping him away from that, and that goes off of what I think you said in a video long ago, with Shanks thinking devil fruits are a curse, maybe because they take away your Haki identity, where they're sort of like leeches that sort of drain or take you away from your Haki.
That actually kind of goes along with what I was theorizing with Shanks too, with like his awakened Haki, basically. I have no other name for it. I just called it awakened Haki because I think that's like the best way to describe it. But yeah, like the different colors of Haki and the stuff that you described in your videos with Sanji and Zoro. I think pretty much all of us in the One Piece like YouTube community kind of agree on that point, which is interesting because like I don't really see anywhere else people talking about like the colors of Haki or the spirits of Haki or whatever. But it seems to be something that permeates throughout every theory that any of us put out, like whether it's you or me or Alpha or anybody. I feel like everybody's kind of in agreement that that is a thing, mostly because of what you just said, which is that Oda talked about like the spirit before, and you know all the stuff with Shanks, and the Haki stuff is much more interesting to me, but I think that's a whole other discussion topic.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and the thing is, I think that's how he could maybe reach Gear 5th, is by awakening his fruit, and that'll basically take the leech off of his body. Or like, because he can't, right now he's not at his full devil fruit potential, so maybe it's acting as like a drain for his Haki, maybe he's not able to use his full potential. And another thing is that Rayleigh actually said that Conqueror's Haki does not get stronger through training, and it actually gets stronger through your willpower. So does that mean that if he has stronger willpower than Kaido, if he wants to become Pirate King, if he's driven to the point where he becomes so like set on beating Kaido that he actually gets better willpower than Kaido, does that mean that his Haki will therefore be stronger?
I think yes. I think it. Well, I don't know, because we saw. I was going to say yes, but actually we don't know, because we've seen his Conqueror's Haki clash with other people with Conqueror's Haki. In fact, we saw it twice in Dressrosa, when it clashed with Don Chinzhao and it clashed with Doflamingo, and they both kind of like bounced away from each other when they struck each other with Conqueror's Haki, like with, you know, where they did like the techniques where like Luffy put his foot out and then like Doflamingo put his foot out and then the punch between him and Don Chinzhao. So we've seen the clash of Conqueror's Haki before, but the whole willpower thing, I mean, I agree with you that I think that's probably how it's leveled, or like how you can sort of like rate Haki over someone else's Haki. But I don't necessarily think that's going to be the thing that overwhelms like Kaido or the Yonko when we get to that point.
Yeah, okay, so we gotta go over like what does Luffy need to beat Kaido right now? And I think those two things are, he's gonna need lots of physical strength, which I think he could actually probably could have, because he fought against these animals in Rusukaina that were able to resist Gear 4. So that means he had to come up with a technique better than Gear 4 to actually fight these animals, because he became the king of the island as Hancock's little posse sort of confirmed. They were like, you became the king of the island. So that means he was able to overcome these animals that could resist Gear 4, probably through raw strength. And I don't think...
So we've already talked about that. We've already talked about awakening or fifth. Go ahead.
Well, I want to extend that into like how Kaido, I think, will be fought, because Kaido does not seem like Doflamingo. He's not the type to use, you know, ranged attacks. I think he's going to be a brawler like Luffy, and that's where Luffy can kind of advance, where he has this insane amount of physical strength. He can lift like buildings. He can throw around that huge gold ball pre-time skip that weighed like hundreds of tons. So he's got this insane physical strength, and with that, I think Kaido will be a test of strength, basically, to kind of put all that strength he gained through fighting animals to the test, whereas Doflamingo was more strategic. He tried to make Luffy run out of time. He used these arrows, artillery, all that. So I think Kaido will basically push his physical strength, and then his devil fruit he needs to improve by probably awakening it. And then Haki, he could essentially, like you said, it's not going to be the only way he overcomes Kaido, because he's still going to need improvements in devil fruit and physical strength. But Haki, he can overcome Kaido by basically wanting to win so bad. Maybe Kaido will capture his crew, something insane, where he'll be pushed to the point of basically, you know, becoming so set on saving them that he will overcome Kaido with willpower of wanting to beat him.
I mean, I think we're kind of in agreement on this, but the other thing that we didn't really talk about when we were talking about the Luffy versus Doflamingo stuff which I think we disagree on, is that I don't think Luffy needs to beat Kaido one-on-one. I don't think that needs to happen. Because Luffy didn't even technically beat Doflamingo one-on-one. He had the help from Law. And Law did, regardless of what the argument is of like how much damage Law's Gamma Knife did to Doflamingo, he still took a lot of Doflamingo's stamina down. Like throughout the fights that he had with him, when it was like the 3-away one with him and Fujitora and Doflamingo, and then again when they were on the bridge, and then again later on, it's like Law did a lot of stuff to take Doflamingo down, and I think it's going to be kind of a similar situation with Kaido, where I think a lot of other characters are going to come together and help Luffy sort of like take Kaido down to the point where then he can overcome him with Haki, he can overcome him with Gear 5th. But I don't necessarily think he needs to beat him one-on-one.
Yeah. And this is kind of where the problem is. I think the point with you said about Law helping him beat Doflamingo, but this has been prominent throughout every single fight. With Arlong, we had Luffy versus Arlong. Luffy got thrown into the water. He needed help from Nojiko and that like pinwheel dude, and while Zoro held off Arlong, and then he had to come back onto land. And if you think about it, you might say, oh, well, that's different. That's not the same as running out of time. But right. Arlong's advantage is water. So technically that was Arlong's strategy. That was his attack, putting him into the water. And then he could have just jumped in the water and killed Luffy right there. Which could be the same argument of, Doflamingo killing Luffy while his time was out. So this has been prominent even with the fight with Enel. Basically, Enel, that guy, what was his name again? The dude who used the Shandian dude who used
Wiper.
Wiper, yeah. He used the reject dial.
Reject dial, thank you.
And that was the strongest type of dial, which should normally kill any person. He used it right on Enel's face, like he went straight up, boom, right to the face. And then Luffy fought Enel, which you could say, the impact dial is insanely strong. You can compare that to the Gamma Knife, maybe even. And Luffy beat Enel, but you could say, okay, that wasn't an official win because the reject dial was used on Enel.
But I don't think the argument with Enel transfers over, because with Enel or Eneru or whatever you want to call him, I mean, he was like Luffy naturally in any circumstance could have beaten him because of his Devil Fruit power. So I think in that situation, Enel would have lost anyway. Like, no, even whether or not the impact dial, reject dial stuff happened or any of the other stuff earlier on, I think Luffy still would have beaten him.
No, Luffy lost. Luffy lost the first time. Enel beat him in terms of combat. He got the little gold thing, threw him off. And then
he had Haki though at that point though, but like Luffy is Haki. Yeah.
Okay, so but he beat Luffy in terms of physical strength because he threw him right off the thing. Luffy basically.
You mean if you're taking like the Devil Fruit part out of it? Okay.
Yeah. He lost in terms of physical strength too, but then he came back with the help of Nami to get back on the ship, and he needed the help of that gold thing. And we could argue all day about him getting help from certain people. He got help from Usopp distracting Luffy during the fight to get his stamina back.
Right.
So this has happened several times. This has happened a lot. I don't think Oda's trying to make an effort to say Luffy needs to double team Kaido. I think that people will probably all try to fight Kaido, like they all try to fight Doflamingo. But ultimately, I think Luffy will, in the end, everyone will probably be taken out by the end of it, along with Kaido's crew. Everyone will be basically beaten, sort of completely worn out. Whereas Luffy it'll just be a one-on-one Luffy Kaido. Law will probably at first, maybe the first fight. Because we know Luffy always, at first, loses the first 1 or 2 fights with, Crocodile. So I think the first fight, he might get help from a few allies. They will damage Kaido. Luffy will probably be destroyed the first time. Luffy will have to get back up, sort of like he did with the Crocodile. And he will have to learn some kind of technique to overcome Kaido, like he always does with the gears. He pulled gear 2nd and 3rd out of nowhere. Nobody really tries to point that out. They were absolutely.
But at the end of the day, One Piece is still like a shonen.
Yeah, it's a shonen. Yeah.
It's going to happen every single time, regardless. He's going to become more powerful. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when and what he's going to do. But I still don't necessarily think, in terms of the overall story, he needs to be stronger than Kaido. I don't think he needs to be. I think he needs to get in a situation where he can take advantage of Kaido, whatever Kaido's weakness is, and exploit it. But I don't necessarily think, in terms of physical strength, he needs to just be stronger than Kaido.
But don't you think that kind of disrupts?
No, not at all. Not at all. Because no. Because Gold, and we had this argument on the stream the other day, and I don't want to get too off topic, but we talked about this with Whitebeard and with Gold Roger. Gold Roger wasn't necessarily the strongest man in the world. That title went to Whitebeard. But Gold Roger had the One Piece. And after his death, Whitebeard became the closest to get the One Piece because of his title of the strongest man in the world. But I don't necessarily think Gold Roger was stronger than Whitebeard. I think Whitebeard and him sparred before, they respected each other, and they saw each other as equals. And I think that's kind of the same thing that's going on here with Luffy, where I think he might get on equal footing at one point with Kaido, like maybe near the very end of the series where he's like Yonko level, but I don't think he ever needs to surpass him because that's not what Luffy wants. Luffy doesn't want to be the strongest man in the world, the strongest beast in the world. You know, he wants to be Pirate King. And Luffy's superpower, quote unquote, throughout the whole series has been to be able to get people to listen to him and get people to sympathize with him and join his side. And I think ultimately that, over everything, over Gear 5, Awakening, whatever, is going to be the thing that ultimately gets him the rank of Pirate King. It's that superpower. It's getting people to listen to him and respect him. And by having all these people behind him, that's what's going to eventually help him take down Kaido, take down Big Mom, take down the world government, the Gorosei, whatever. I think it's that. And I think people underestimate that part of it and maybe put too much emphasis on what Luffy's actual attacks are going to do, as opposed to just what Luffy inherently has had since the beginning of the series, which is the ability to recruit very powerful people and get them to work on his side.
All right, so I'll make a response, then you can maybe reply. We'll finish up after this. Okay, so the thing is, this is what I kind of think. I do think that he does need allies because every Yonko crew has allies. Whitebeard had tons of allies.
Sure.
And I think at the end of the day, Luffy, as the captain, and Luffy has said this himself, his job as captain is to kick whoever's, ass that he needs to. He said this with Crocodile. He's like, I'm going to be the one to kick Crocodile's ass. You guys sit back and fight Crocodile's men. He said this multiple times, and even with the example of Mihawk versus Zoro, he did not want to interfere. He said, guys, do not interfere with this fight. Zoro, even if Zoro is on the complete opposite end, he needs to do this by himself. And his quote throughout the entire series is to gain allies, but it's also that fight your own fights. And with Doflamingo, he did get, people like Law to help him, but that was a 2v2, and I think that if Oda really wanted to make an effort to show Luffy needs allies to fight strong dudes, he would have shown throughout the series with Enel that he needed, the double team people. He would have had help from Zoro against Arlong. He would have had help from, whoever he needed to against Crocodile. And I think the allies, while the allies are important, they're not important for double teaming the strongest dude. Because the thing with Kaido is that Luffy said he said, I'm going to defeat all 4 Yonko. He said, I'm going to take each one down, and he has, and throughout the series, he's always said, I'm going to kick this person's ass. It's never been, let's all do this together. Right. At the end of the day, I think his allies are there to fight Kaido's allies. And if you think about it, if his allies weren't there, then Kaido's allies would all double team Luffy. So the point of the allies is not to increase his individual strength, but to rather make him, have a huge crew, be able to fight people with huge crews. And basically, if he can't beat Kaido, then he should basically say, I'm not strong enough. He shouldn't say, I need help from you guys, come on, because that has never once happened throughout the story. It's always been, if he does get help, it's not usually to actually do damage, it's usually to, help him, the example with Enel and the example with Arlong, he's had people help him to be able to recover, but they actually haven't dished out any damage. Zoro didn't actually damage Arlong. Nojiko, even though she helped him out of the water, she didn't actually damage Arlong. And with Doflamingo, Law did do a significant amount of damage to Doflamingo, and so did Red Hawk. But if you think about it, if Doflamingo was at full strength the entire fight, it would have been unfair towards Luffy, because Luffy was, according to Doflamingo, he had taken heavy damage and was about at 50%. So I don't think the Gamma Knife was necessarily to say he needs that on top of Luffy to beat Doflamingo, but rather to even out the playing field, because it was supposed to essentially at first even out the playing field.
Right. I don't think we disagree with there though. That part I don't think we disagree with in terms of Law and Doflamingo, but I think we may have to agree to disagree for the stuff later on, because I still don't necessarily think. I think he will end up taking on Kaido 1v1. I think the final punch delivered on Kaido or whatever when we get to that point will be Luffy. But I think there's going to be a lot of stuff that happens before then. And I think both of them will probably be worn down to 50% before they end up going blow to blow. I don't know. It's way too early to even speculate on that. I feel like we shouldn't even.
It's just, yeah.
Cool.
I've always had a thing against Fairy Tail and have you ever seen Fairy Tail?
No.
Okay, I hate it so much because I stopped watching it because at first it was they did 1v1s, and then eventually it became this huge thing where every fight was him relying on people dishing out damage to his opponent because they were so strong. And it was basically a huge thing about friendship. You know, everyone needs to be friends and we need to all be happy. And then he would recruit every single person he met. It was basically like a super cheesy version of One Piece because I know there was a lot of inspiration from it. But I wish you could have seen it because then you would understand my pain when people say that he's going to get like help against Kaido, because I do think at first he'll get help, but I don't think that he should. I think he should at least do 80 to 90% of the damage at the end of the day. Okay. But yeah, we're going to agree to disagree. And of course, in the comments, this is a discussion not just between me and Roger, but between everyone. So if you want to talk in the comments, you know, disagree or who do you agree with, or if you have a whole different idea, go right ahead. Oh my God, this was 45 minutes.
I told you this was going to be long. I knew as soon as you said you wanted to record this, I'm like, oh, I know.
Oh yeah, that's why I try to keep it organized with the time, just because like I want.
Well, it still was organized. The thing was, it's just there's so much to talk about when you're talking about Luffy's potential strength. He's the main character of the series. We're talking about what his potential final powers may be in a series that still has like 300 chapters to go. So, I mean, it's going to be a long video regardless.
Yeah. All right, guys. So, once more, comment, dislike, like the video, whatever you want to do. Subscribe to Rogersbase if you haven't. He does theories, he does discussions, he does reviews.
And subscribe to One World. This man's got less subs than I do. Subscribe to this man.
Well, if they're on my channel, they're obviously already subscribed. But,
yeah, it's true.
Or if you post it to your channel, whatever. Yeah, this has been a long discussion, so I'm going to end it here. And I will see you guys later.